Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. This is your host, Brian Peterson. Our guest today is Michael Stubbs, who is a historian and the founder of the Mount Mitchell Prairie Guards, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving the Mount Mitchell Heritage Prairie Park in northeast Kansas. Mount Mitchell is a valuable place where visitors have the opportunity to make multifaceted connections. It is a star attraction of Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a sacred indigenous site where ancestors are buried. It is one of the first sites in Kansas to be recognized as a National Park Service Network to Freedom Underground Railroad commemorative site. It is an auxiliary site of the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. It is a monarch way station. It is a featured attraction on the Native Stone Scenic Byway and preserves a large remnant of tallgrass prairie and serves as an example of a diminished ecosystem that is more endangered than the Amazon forest. You can get more information about Mount Mitchell at mountmitchellprairie.org. Hey, Michael, thanks for joining us today. That's quite a list of accolades for Mount Mitchell.
Well, it kind of makes me laugh because every one of those distinctions has been an effort to get folks to recognize how important this site is. And that's finally starting to happen after 14 years now we've been at it.
Yeah, and how did so about 14 years ago, or is it before that you started to lead the charge as the founder of the Prairie Guards?
Well, to go way back, there was a group of historians who wanted to get together to plan the activities for the sesquicentennial of Kansas Territory, which was back in, I don't know my math, 2001 or 2000, long time ago. And what grew out of that group and our planning was a realization that the Underground Railroad in eastern Kansas had not really been studied in enough detail to have a sense of how the entire system worked. Local historians in Lawrence and Baldwin City, Vinland, places like that, had found their own stories, but nobody had put all the stories together from the different places in eastern Kansas. And so one of our concrete things that happened from our committee was we made a brochure called The Underground Railroad in Kansas. And that was the first time all these sites were brought together. And then out of that grew the idea to have a national heritage area in western Missouri and eastern Kansas. And initially the theme was going to be Bleeding Kansas. That's the period that historians, they refer to after Kansas was made an official territory. It had been Indian territory up until 1854. And so they made it an official, they made it a territory, and the folks that came to the territory would vote whether it would be free or slave. It was the first time that would happen. It used to be that every time a territory would enter the Union, there'd be a free state and a pro-slavery state. So the balance of power in Congress was balanced. And that had been going on since at least 1830. And so for the first time, the people in the territory would vote. And so what happened is all these pro-slavery folks from Missouri just had to cross the imaginary line, and they were in Kansas, and they could vote. But this had been brewing for about, at least a year in Congress, the idea of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And so abolitionists in New England had time to form the New England Immigrant Aid Society, and they got cut rates on train travel, and they helped the new communities that formed free state communities. with sawmills and temporary housing and all that kind of stuff. So you had this clash, and before all the Free State people got here, the first election elected all these pro-slavery people, and they adopted a pro-slavery constitution. And so once all the Free State people had arrived later that year, we're talking 1856, they actually had the numbers, and they formed their own government and elected their own governor and all that, which eventually they were charged with treason for doing that. But anyway, so there was actual violence. This is where a lot of people say the Civil War actually began, at Blackjack Battlefield, which is south of Lawrence near Baldwin City. John Brown and an officer of the U.S. military actually exchanged gunfire. Wow. And that's local people want to say that was the first shot of the Civil War, not at Fort Sumter. But, nothing just happens like a switch. Look at now. Where is this leading to? Anyway, I could go off on that, but let's talk about the park.
Yeah. Well, Michael, that was it sounded like that was quite a rush to come to Kansas to, make it however people wanted to. I mean, there was a lot of freedom in that. And so after these anti-slavery folks set up their own government, it was treason, there was some violence. Where did it go from there?
Yeah, thank you for keeping me on track. It's going to be necessary.
That's okay.
So this colony from New Haven, Connecticut, primarily, but it was all around Connecticut. New Haven had been the site of the Amistad trial back in the 1830s, when some slaves enslaved people had mutinied on a ship and turned the ship back to go back to Africa. And they were intercepted and they were put on trial. And John Adams, former president, was one of the attorneys for these people. And it was big news for a long time. And it radicalized the population in Connecticut who were reading, the daily accounts. I mean, there's a movie called Amistad, if you really want to get into it. Well, Captain Mitchell, William Mitchell, his father was one of the founders of the Anti-Slavery Society in New Haven, or actually in Middletown, which was south by the coast, or east, I guess. But he was connected to New Haven. And so he had that in his bones. He had this since he was a child, he was raised in an anti-slavery abolitionist household. And so it was second nature to him. He had gone off to the gold fields in California and Australia. And he came back and got back to Connecticut around late 1855, 56, just in time to see what was going on with the Bleeding Kansas, with the immigration to Kansas. And so he joined something called the Connecticut-Kansas Colony. And actually, the man who gets credit for founding that group his name is Charles Lynes. And he was one of the deacons at the Old North Church in New Haven. And he's the man who built the coffin for Webster. What was Webster's first name? Henry Webster? No. Anyway, he was known locally, and he had put these appeals in the newspaper saying, let's form a colony to go to Kansas to make it a free state. And so about 90 people responded, actually more, but when they actually left in the spring of 1856, they had, I think, about 89 people, and five women and 3 children, maybe, mostly men. And funny enough, lots of people connected with Yale, graduates, students, professors. This was, in my life in the 60s, that time just before the Civil War, when all that was happening. It reminds me in my life of the 60s and what I went through with the anti-war movement and all that. You know, you're young and you're idealistic and you want to fight for justice. And this was what was happening in 1856. So all these folks came to Kansas. Another little side note is Henry Ward Beecher, who was the famous preacher from Brooklyn. His sister, Harriet Beecher Stowe, wrote the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. And if you know your Civil War history, some people credited that book with actually being the spark that started the Civil War, because it portrayed the life of enslaved people so vividly to those who read it, Northerners mostly. Anyway, so he was, you know, there's a book written by a friend of mine called The Most Famous Man in America. It won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago. It's all about his life. He was so eloquent and was able to really motivate people with his oratory. Well, he was friends with a lot of these folks in the Connecticut-Kansas colony because his family came from Connecticut. He went to school in Connecticut, and he wanted to help his friends. And so right before they were leaving, they met in Brewster Hall on the campus of Yale, or was it Old North Church? See, all the little facts like that, sometimes as I age, they don't always mesh. Anyway, one of those two places, certainly a very well-known place. If it was the church, they actually rented the church for the evening. It wasn't like at a service or something. Anyway, he says, you know, these people are going to Kansas unarmed. And what can we do about it? Because the Sharps rifle, which was the most advanced weapon of the time, was actually made there nearby Hartford. And somebody was going to supply rifles to them, but that deal fell through. And so in this going away meeting, Beecher stands up and says, we can't let them go unarmed. If we can raise the money to buy rifles here tonight, I will pledge 25 from my church in Brooklyn. And so then this raucous, jovial, fake auction kind of happened, and the junior class at Yale said, well, I'll give 25, we'll give 25, and then Mr. Killam will, he'll give 25 for one rifle. That's how much a rifle costs. And then Beecher would do a word play on the person's name, like Killam. I don't know what he said, but, you know, he made everybody laugh. It was this big thing. So by the end of the evening, they had secured 25 money for 25 rifles from the local community, and then Beecher's congregation $600 and some dollars. He sent a check. Beecher did not send the rifles in boxes marked Bibles. That's an in-joke for some people who might watch this. Anyway, so this made national news. And so it was like the O.J. Simpson of the time. I mean, a lot of Southerners sent their kids to Yale to go to school, and there was a lot of alumnus from the South, and they did not like this happening. And the papers just ate it all up. And so Charles Lyons ended up writing a diary that was published in the Hartford, I forget the name of the paper, Palladian, the Hartford Palladian, and then other newspapers like the New York Times, they published his diary as they went to Kansas. So why I'm telling you all this in detail is this park, the Mount Mitchell Heritage Prairie, it was the land that Captain Mitchell, one of the leaders of this colony, claimed when he got there in 1856. And his son gave the park to the State Historical Society 50 years ago, 1953. And the state agreed to take it and make it as a memorial to this colony who came to Kansas to make Kansas a free state. And so the State Historical Society accepted it, but nothing ever happened. The leadership of the society changed. There was never any funds to develop the park. And then there was a reorganization of state government, I don't know, about 30 years ago. And somehow ownership of the park, instead of going to the State Wildlife and Parks, it went to a nonprofit that supports the State Historical Society. So the nonprofit had no staff, no funding to do anything with the park. So it sat there for all those years, 50 years just about, and then back to my group in Lawrence we were called the Territorial Kansas Heritage Alliance. I learned about this history that I've just relayed to you. I didn't know it at the time, but I got into it, and over the years I've really drilled down on it. We felt what happened is the family, the State Historical Society, their director was retiring, and he wanted to clean house for his successor. And one of the things he wanted to do was get rid of this white elephant, and at that point, the park was only 30 acres or so. And so I happened to be on the board of the Historical Society at the time. So I heard this rumor and found out it was true. So I got involved with the Mitchell family. That's the first people I contacted and said, let us local folks, let's make the park your grandfather envisioned. And great-grandfather, actually, the generation now. And fortunately, bless their hearts, there are 5 grandchildren of Will Mitchell, who gave the 30 acres to the state. And they all completely, totally got on board. And so we started working with the Historical Society to transfer the park to us. And a year or so into the process, we got a little distracted for a couple years because this area that Mount Mitchell represents, it's tallgrass prairie. And there's only less than 4% of tallgrass prairie left in the world. It was once an ecosystem that stretched all the way from Manitoba down to the Gulf Coast in Texas. Wow. And I don't know how many million acres, but it was an incredibly wonderful ecosystem because it was just out of the rain shadow of the Rockies. So our average rainfall is like 36 inches or something. And so the grasses, they truly would grow 7, sometimes 8 feet as high as a horse's head. And there are many, many descriptions of that by the early explorers and people who first came to the region that weren't Native American. Anyway, so this threat came. We're talking 20 years ago, 21 now, of industrial wind in the Flint Hills, and it was incredible. It's like oil wildcatters. It's going to happen right now with solar. There is so much government money out there to do something that, the famous government trough, there are all these people who want to form solar companies. In our case, it was wind, and build wind turbines. And the sites they picked were always near transmission lines because they weren't a developed enough company, these original, I don't even know what the term was. I call them wildcatters. I mean, it would come down to maybe the company had 3 employees or something, and they were going around and they'd get the leases signed from people. Well, we did our research and realized that the ecological damage that huge turbine complexes cause to an ecosystem is just not acceptable. And so we we had a meeting. There was a group called Protect the Flint Hills that was formed, and everybody who loved this region, didn't matter, Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, we saw the threat. And fortunately, we had some well-connected people that came on board and had the ear of the governor at the time. It was Governor Sebelius, and Democrat of Kansas. We do have Democrats in Kansas. Anyway, through lobbying her, I don't know, I wasn't in the back rooms for all that, but working with the power companies, she agreed to no force of law, nothing, just her bully pulpit or her pulpit. In cooperation with all the power companies, they agreed on a map of the heart of the Flint Hills and the industrial wind that the power purchasers would not buy power produced within the Flint Hills. So it essentially protected the Flint Hills. And every governor since her, Parkinson, Brownback, Kelly, hope I didn't, and Collier, they all agreed, and it still stands today. And it's a gentleman's agreement. I mean, the power companies have realized that, as I said, it's the last 4% of tallgrass prairie in the world, and it's landscape sale. I mean, I didn't say, Iowa, all of Iowa was tallgrass prairie, and the only prairie they have left pretty much is along the railroad right-of-ways and the highways.
Wow.
And they recognized that about 40 years ago. And, oh, my God, if anybody's interested about how to preserve prairie in a situation like that, Iowa has done an incredible job. The science of, it's called integrated roadside vegetation management. And it's all science-based. It's don't use herbicides, it pollutes the water. Don't cut the grass because the wildlife, instead of they can hunker down and hide when a car comes by instead of having no cover and feeling threatened and fly in front of the car. I mean, it just goes on and on, the wonderful science of it. And they have adopted it there. And so they have wildflowers along their highway. Well, unfortunately, that's a whole nother digression that I hope to work with the governor this year on, frankly. There's a lot of us. Now might be the time to do this. We've got a new head of Department of Transportation coming in. There's a better way to do it. And here in Kansas, since we have these thousands of acres of tallgrass prairie, what? You care about the roadside? It's just a ditch. We're still in the ditch mentality. Iowa is, wow, this is an ecosystem we want to preserve.
Wow.
Well, anyway, so Brian, you got to help me here. I just have to go off.
No, it's fun, Michael. You're a wealth of knowledge. And one thing that I was thinking about for the listeners out there is a lot of people are pretty surprised to hear about an area called the Flint Hills of Kansas. A lot of people think of Kansas as pancake flat. And we actually have some topography in northeast Kansas, and Mount Mitchell is right in the middle of that. And it's a very special place. It's not really developed. And Michael, I don't know if you have some information about the Flint Hills that can just kind of help listeners visualize the area.
Yeah, well, it's like the shape of a spear point, a flint spear point. And it goes from just south of the Nebraska border in the north of Kansas. And most of the time it's about 30 miles wide, but then at the wide part, it's about 90 miles wide, I think. And it goes all the way down into Oklahoma, into Osage County, Oklahoma. And it's in the flyway of many, many migrating birds. Right above my house, I live about 15 miles from Mount Mitchell, out in the hills. And on the hill right above my house, these upland sandpipers from eastern Mexico come and nest. And if anybody, go Google it, or what is the bird, my bird, iBird, whatever it's called, go and listen to an upland sandpiper. It is the most wonderful sound. It's joy. It makes you smile. and they nest right up at Mount Mitchell also, but right above my house. And, I know when they're gone, they leave sometime mid-July, go back to Mexico with their young that they've raised. Anyway, Brian, help. Where was I?
Well, we were talking about the Flint Hills.
The Flint Hills. Okay.
But I did want to also ask, in terms of Flint Hills, why was it that the Connecticut, Kansas colony decided to choose this area of Kansas to fight slavery? Like, what was it about Northeast Kansas, the Flint Hills area, that's where Captain Mitchell ended up?
Well, they had sent a scouting party out, and the scouting 5 guys, and like a month before the big party left, and they went all over eastern Kansas. And it's a very good question, by the way. They went down to developing community. And mind you, again, this is America. This is capitalism. A lot of these people who came, we're going to start a town. We're going to start businesses. We're going to build railroads. It was all opportunity. And there were a lot of what they call paper towns. Somebody would go and buy some land or claim some land and then plat it. And one of those places was Wabaunsee. And Wabaunsee, Wabaunsee, is the anglicization of something like Wabanse or something like that. He was a Potawatomi chief. And as I had said earlier, eastern Kansas had been the original part of the original Indian Territory that went all the way from Canada all the way down to the Gulf. And I mean, today we think Indian Territory, you think Oklahoma because it was the last one, but there were others before that. And so the reservations, all the titles hadn't been settled yet when the territory opened. And so these 5 scouts went around, and one of the places they went, an old missionary to the Indians, had run into one of these guys in Kansas City, and he said, you should go check out right west of the Potawatomi Reservation. And there's a place called Antelope Creek. And somebody there, it's a French name, he plotted it the previous fall. And so there was already a platted town there called Wabaunsee. And so this one of the fellows of the 5 went there and really liked it. And the site was chosen because it was right outside. I mean, it was just like Captain Mitchell, the park is less than a mile outside the reservation. So it was the first place west of the reservation where that was legal to settle at the time, that had decent water. And they thought, at this time, they still thought the Kansas River was navigable. And because steamships, they'd had some wet years, and steamships could go all the way up to Manhattan and Junction City, but that didn't last long. Plus the railroads nixed. They started building bridges because they didn't want the competition of the river traffic.
Gosh.
It's the American story, but what can we
say? Yeah.
So anyways, so that's why they ended up there. And another point is, a lot of these groups came, but the Connecticut, Kansas colony, which I didn't finish the thought, the whole thing with the rifles, that meeting hit the press, and the headlines were and the other part I didn't tell you, is that when Beecher sent the check to Lines for the rifles, a parishioner had included 50 Bibles, a crate of Bibles. And so Lines gets this crate of Bibles and then the check. Well, the headlines were Bibles and Rifles for Kansas, Kanzas, and so that was the beginning of this myth that all, even reputable historians, I mean, they won't let it go, even shown the primary documents and everything. They have this thing that the rifles were shipped in boxes marked Bibles to Kansas. So that's how it got the name. The Sharps rifle became known as the Beecher's Bible, the rifle itself.
That's funny.
So when if you're ever reading that, that's Peter Bible really means the Sharps rifle. And so that again fed into all that press I was talking about, those headlines. And again, help Brian.
Yeah, so
bring me back.
Yeah, I'll bring you back here, Michael. So at one point, Mount Mitchell was kind of just bouncing around different people, agencies. You heard that it needs a home, it needs someone to look after it, and you come into play with this. You're like, hey, I have an idea. I have people that are interested in this. We have knowledge behind this. We have people that know how to preserve the native tall grass. We have people that are historians that can bring out these stories to, really show the heritage aspect of Mount Mitchell. And so what happened at that point when you started like, hey, why don't we take over Mount Mitchell?
Well, I did have a point to telling you about, that's where the train of thought was. When we started negotiating with the Historical Society, then this threat to the Flint Hills came up. Well, what it ended up doing, it brought all those people who love the history of the Flint Hills and the culture. That's the other thing. You see, the Flint Hills is all grassland cattle country. I mean, it's the best grass in the world, a lot of people claim. And so that threat to us brought us all together. We got to know each other across the party lines, across everything. And from that, we started this annual event. It's called Symphony in the Flint Hills. And it's a project with the Kansas City Symphony. And I think next year will be the 21st year. Anyway.
I got to go to that. I've heard great things about it. My neighbors go to it. They bring their kids out. And I'm going to go next. It's in the summer, right?
Yeah, it's the second Saturday in June.
Okay. You got to make it happen this year.
Well, anyway, so the formation, the people who started Symphony in the original, Jane Koger was having a birthday party, a big numbered birthday party. And so she had musicians come play on her ranch, and on 2,000 people came, her friends and whatever. Wow. So that was so wonderful. Then we have this, what I call the wind war. People don't like me to use that term, but it really was like daily battles. My God. We finally went to the Supreme Court in our county. I did tell you about the heart of the Flint Hills still stands, but it's at the whim of politicians. But what happened is, in Wabunsee County, the county commissioners listened to the residents, and that we banned them. And it went all the way to the Kansas Supreme Court twice, and we won both times. And so we brought all these people together. And so from that energy that started Symphony in the Flint Hills, Mount Mitchell kind of, I guess because I was involved with both, it became part of all that. And that's what I don't know if I was saying it before we started recording, but it was after you introduced. All those accolades that the site has, they're being recognized more and more. And because I did listen to you and Bess. Our previous
episode. Yeah.
Which I want to talk about. We're at the same time, again, that Territorial Kansas Heritage Alliance that started over 20 years ago. What came out of that was the Blackjack Battlefield. They just got a grant from the Sunderland Foundation to build a visitor center there. I mean, those Carrie Altenburn and others, they got that site recognized for what it was. They were able to purchase it, turn it into a park. Constitution Hall in Topeka, same thing. Local historians wanting to save a site got together and created this thing. They just got a $5 million grant to work on their thing. And so Mount Mitchell is in line for that kind of attention. Good. It just hasn't happened yet. I think primarily, I don't know how to say this, but I guess I'm the founder, yes. And we have a board of 8. You're one of the 2008. We don't have any paid staff. I'm retired, so I end up doing a lot of things, like all those distinctions. They didn't just happen. There was a lot, like 20 years ago, getting listed as one of the first 3 Network to Freedom Underground Railroad commemorative site. I mean, do you know the paperwork that's involved with that kind of stuff? It took us 10 years to get national register designation because, and rightfully so, from the beginning, they always wanted to include the Mitchell farmstead. That's something that I might as well mention now because you probably will ask later. The park is right now about 170 acres, but right across the road is this 1856 log cabin which was an Underground Railroad station where enslaved people seeking their freedom on the Underground Railroad were hidden in the attic of this house that is still there. It just kind of grew around it. In Victorian times, they added on to it, but the living room is the original log cabin. And then there's this wonderful limestone barn. Our long-term goal is to make that the visitor center and a little house museum there to tell that story about the Underground Railroad. And so, again, looping back, the park was originally, when we finally worked with the legislature, the Attorney General determined that the state couldn't just give it to us. We weren't an official nonprofit yet. This started, it was so typical of grassroots. Locals wanted to save something. And with no experience fundraising, no experience organizing really, how do we do this? And so the Attorney General said, well, you have to partner with somebody. So we found a partner, and the understanding was never clear with them, and we've had problems since. That's all I'll say about that. Okay. But let me just say that they have done absolutely nothing to develop the park. Anyway, so that was the original 30 acres. And once we did all that, and the Governor Kelly of Kansas, also a Democrat, she is the best. I spent time with her in November, right, actually the day before the election. And, she got her start in Wabaunsee County. And all day long, it was a gratitude tour for her. She's retiring after this term. She has now 4 years as governor. She got into politics to help people. And she's one of the genuine people who that's true about. And that's why, I don't know why I get emotional about it. But that's why the Republicans elected her, because she does good things for the people. That's why she won. It's as simple as that. Kansans are very pragmatic, and they know BS when they see it, pretty much, most of us. Anyway, so she was running for the Senate, the Kansas Senate, 20-some years ago, 2004, I think it was. And she only won by 100 votes. And she credits Wabaunsee County because as giving her that victory, because her campaign people were saying, don't waste your time in Wabaunsee County. They're all Republicans. You're not going to get any votes there. But bless her heart, she came to one of those candidate information things. And that was at the height of the wind war. And we grilled her with questions, and she answered all of them intelligently, and she agreed to help us. She did help us. She won by 100 votes. And so here we are just a month or so ago, and she knows it's her last day of campaigning. And so where does she want to spend it? In Wabaunsee County. And she did. And so, oh God, how did I get off on that one, Brian?
I don't know, but I'm having a lot of fun with it, Michael.
Okay. Well, anyway, so we got the 30 acres, and it was like, then we went on for 10 years, and we realized, well, we built a website, and with the Kansas Trails Council, we laid out trails, let them do it. We got advice on managing the prairie from the Konza Biological Station, associated with K-State, Nature Conservancy, Kelly Kincher, professor at KU, all these folks, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, they're all, and I say those agencies, but it's all people. They're all people that we've come to know over the 20 years. And people have retired, and the people who have replaced them have gotten on board with managing Mount Mitchell. And it's been controversial because, as anybody who really knows what they're talking about, you have to use fire and herbicides to control the brush. I mean, climate change has changed it favored grasses for eons, and now it's favoring woody species. And so we have all this invasive brush surrounding the park, and it's a constant seed load coming in. And we had the park for 10 years, and we didn't realize what was happening. And then Dr. Jesse Nippert said, "You're going to lose it if you don't do something about this, because you are a remnant prairie, and they're the most vulnerable, and you've got that seed load all the way around you, so you better start being aggressive with the brush." And that caused problems with our so-called partners. Anyway, so we just went along. Well, then, and we were small board. I could do everything because it only costs us about $30,000 a year to pay the insurance and all the expenses of mowing trails and all that, and brush control. But then what happened? Well, I skipped 15 acres. So we got the original 30, and we knew even before we got the 30 that we would have to buy 15 acres to give us an access. I mean, that was one of the reasons the park never got developed over 50 years, was because there was no access. So there was a township road on the south side of the park, but the 15 acres between the road and actually the park was owned by this most wonderful man, Junior Braymeyer, who, I tell you, of all the people I've ever known, Junior Braymeyer, this farmer, simple farmer from Kansas, is one of my favorite. He was such a joy to be around. He was the most guileless human being I've ever known. Anyway, he loved the idea of a park, and nice. He sold us 15 acres, and we had our access road. Then we built a parking area. And again, with Bess, I mean, you guys listening to the science of what you're doing, it's like, I've lived this for 20 years and you're saying things. Oh, I get it now. Oh, you're the theory of it. We've been blindly doing it. Right. Just something will come up where decisions have to be made, and you just try to do the best you can. Well, so we sailed along for years with our 45 acres now, and lo and behold, the 125 acres that was also part of the Mitchell farm, that's between the park and the farmstead, came on the market. And for the last 45 years, the county has been promoting the intersection at the northwest corner of that property as major development, commercial and residential. And they are rebuilding the highway. It's, 10 miles between the city of Wamego and the interstate to the south, I-70. And they've completed the first phase of that construction. There are 3. They're started on the second. And so the whole corridor now is going to be residential and commercial. And we thought, oh my God, if we don't buy it, it's going to be quick shop, gas station, who knows?
Right.
I found out later from someone who was thinking of buying it, would have been 10 ranchettes. And so we just took a deep breath and a swallow and said, well, I'd never raised $500,000 before. And so we plunged into it. We got, fortunately, again, the landowners were very friendly to us. They let us have a year to raise the money, and we raised enough to get a mortgage, and so we bought it. So here we are, and here we are now. Really, that happened we paid off the mortgage in the end of 21. Here we are. We're an 8-member board, and it's been me doing most everything. Of course, we've got incredible all those people who, I've raised 700,000 probably altogether, maybe more. So we have a lot of support, but we don't have any paid staffs. We realize the potential now. We're a 170-acre park. We're building a new access road and a new parking area. And my goal is to have a interpretive shelter. And I have my eye on one. It's called Frying Pan Park. It's right by Dulles Airport in Virginia, if anybody listens to this. It's Fairfax County, Virginia. And it's this wonderful hexagonal shelter. And they use it for recreation and picnic and whatnot. But my idea is to have garage doors on it so it can be protected from the wind and the weather. Mm-hmm. But that would go up and keep it open if it's nice. And then have interpretive displays all around the outside of this hexagon. And then this fellow at Frying Pan Park said theirs was paid off in 3 years just by rentals. And that would also, listening to Bess yesterday, it would get more people to the park. I mean, you were saying, people in Manhattan, very few people know about the park. And all those things you said, every time National Register, Civil Rights Trail, every time one of those distinctions, I thought, more people will know about it. But we've come a long way, but we're still not there yet. Mm-hmm, and I think having a space because already people love to come and walk and fly their kites. And we, thanks to our partners, we do allow dogs. That was their decision in the beginning. Kanza doesn't allow dogs, and that's a big problem for them because keeping them out. For us, it hasn't been a problem yet, but I'm sure it will be with poop, and because we don't have anybody to, pick. We don't have trash receptacles anywhere. So with what we're doing this coming spring, with the new access road and parking area, we're going to have garbage pickup. We're going to, for the first time, have a porta potty. Fortunately, you can just pay somebody to do that. But we're at this point where the board needs to grow, and hopefully we can hire someone to take my place to do what I've been doing all this time.
Yep. Michael, with there are several parks out there. I think one example is in Arkansas, Buffalo National River, where they actually, and it's a river, so people float down it, and you have a lot of young adults that party on the river. So they float down the river with their 6-pack or whatnot. And they had a trash issue. They implemented no trash receptacles at all. And they found that people did a better job of carrying their trash out if there's no trash receptacles.
Well, I love to hear that, because that's been the case so far. But, and the present parking area is Lover's Lane. The things I've found there in the parking lot.
It is Lover's Lane. And I have found a lot of things I don't like to say. I go there early, right? And so if I'm going there early on a Friday morning, there may have been some excitement there Thursday night and stuff that I don't want to find, but every now and then I do find some stuff. But hey, going back towards, you're developing the northern end of the park. And recently, one of the things that I really loved, I love how you manage the place with a lot of sensitivity and a lot of compassion. And before the start of construction began on that northern part of the park, you had a blessing done by a local indigenous tribe member that was really powerful. I attended it. I've never attended anything like that. And it was something that was just really, really beautiful. And how did you come across those types of important things that are important towards the livelihood of people that live here? They have their ancestors buried in this area. How did you know to even act with that type of compassion and be able to have that type of
response,
blessing done? Yeah.
Well, again, it goes back. What is the phrase that's now become, like everything these days, become a little bit controversial? Acknowledgement ceremonies. You know, it's quite. It's been the thing for before something even. Where was I? I was somewhere. You acknowledge the native people, the indigenous people. If you're in an auditorium at a university and you're going to do a big thing or something, a lot of people will acknowledge the people who were there first. My partner's a member of the Motion Picture Academy, and they have a streaming service, and they have this, before you go anywhere on their website, this thing acknowledging the native people, the Tuva people in Los Angeles, where their new museum was built. So was popularized recently, but it's also become controversial because people think, oh, we did that, and we don't have to think about indigenous people in today and their needs. And so I genuinely, when we first acquired the park, and this is sensitive, and I don't think this is going out to thousands of people. I looked at the numbers before, but you're going to have a great library, Brian.
Yeah.
One of the things that we had to contend with is that Native American burial mound. It's from a culture that existed in this area about 1,500, 2,000 years ago, and there were more people then in the county than there are now. I mean, these creeks and this landscape supported. There were mussels in the creeks. There was so much food. And they all lived. They didn't live in big villages. They lived in little family groups all along the streams. Anyway, there were a lot of people here, and that particular culture built there. And this is true. I was in New Zealand, and there was something similar there. They built their burial mounds connected to water. And on the top, it's the most dramatic place I've ever seen in Kansas. I haven't been everywhere, so maybe for me at least. You look to the northwest, and the river is coming at you, and the light's reflecting off. You look to the northwest, northeast, and the river's going away. It's a very ley line, call it what you want. It's a very spiritual place just for that. And so that's where they placed this burial mound. Well, ever since the park was, made a park in 1953, where do people want to stand? They want to stand on the highest point of the hill. And that happened to be the burial mound. Plus, where did they put the monument that Will Mitchell stipulated had to be erected in his will? On the burial mound. Yeah. So to get to your question, the first thing we did, I'm dear friend John Bursaw of the Citizens Band Potawatomi, he and his brother Lyman, I went to them and said, what would you do? And my very first job in Kansas I was on an archaeological dig, and I've been friends with all of the state archaeologists ever since 1966. And Bob Horde, who just retired last month, I asked him what his opinion was, and he put me in contact with a group. What do you call them? There's like 7 archaeologists and people who share emails with each other. And so we put it out to his group, what would you do? And of course, we got 5 different answers out of the 7, because the idea in archaeology has always, and still is for many places, don't even talk about these burial mounds. If you talk about them, somebody's going to come and loot them. And that, unfortunately, has been true in many cases. But in our case, it's been a public park for 50 years, and the trail is 2 feet away from it.
Right.
And so what do we do? Do we put a barrier around it? Do we do any signage? what do we do? And so the consensus finally of all those folks was, we're going to put a low, maybe, I don't know, 18 inches posts around it. It's about 40 feet across. And then just string either a chain or a wall. We wanted, everything in this park has to be tasteful while I'm on board.
Well, it's important.
Like our benches come from Connecticut. They're the same benches that are used in Central Park in New York.
Really?
They're the most, they're the most
I didn't know that.
Beautiful benches. They were designed in the 30s by a woman whose name I want to say Dorothy Lynch, but that's a salad dressing, so I don't know. Somebody similar name. Anyway, so we're just gonna say, the sign's gonna be a low sign, say, please respect this sacred site, and that's it. And then they tell us, down in the parking area in the interpretive center, we're going to be telling the story of the Native Americans, because, just 8 miles to the southeast of the site, there is a habitation site dates 12,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
12,000.
12,000. And they, and that's only because the creek level is it's this high. See, there was all this lust blown in this area after the last glacier melted, because, the glaciers had ground up the soil and everything, and it blew around for God knows how long. And it was all up in the highlands. And then all over the hundreds of years, it all washed down into the valleys. And so it's actually, this is very near John Hunt, another board member's property. The layers of silt or loess, it's like 30 feet. And so that 12,000 year habitation level is at creek level. So who knows how far is it another 10 feet, another 20 feet, that the creek, below the creek level, which could put the dates back further. But anyway, so with all that, we moved. The first thing we did was move the monument off the grave, and took it. I wanted to take it off the hilltop altogether, but other people, on the board didn't want to do that, so we just moved it, I don't know, 100 feet away or something. But I mean, how to manage a park. I mean, and so the ceremony, when it came time, we honestly, from our hearts, wanted a blessing ceremony. It was virgin prairie that had supported populations for hundreds of years, and we come along and we plowed it up and we extracted from it for 100 years or so. And the land across the road now, just in the last month or so, which was also Mitchell Farm, wonderful. It's called Second Bench. Wonderful loamy soil. What are they building there now? A furniture store and manufacturing and a roofing company, and 3 new
totally
houses.
Ripped up. Yeah, it's totally ripped up.
That's right. That's surrounding the Mitchell farmstead. Fortunately, those wonderful people, they let us create a buffer around the farmstead, so that when we do acquire the farmstead, it will have this buffer around it. But it came from our hearts that we wanted to acknowledge the past, and it was a healing thing for me. I wasn't there. I was, I had COVID and was stuck with that. But John, I had, and as a side to this, I had actually gone to the Kanza tribe. Kansas is named after the Kanza or Kaw tribe, and my family's had relations with them for 200 years. My first cousin, 5 times removed, was actually the Quaker who administered to them, and when they were forced to leave, went with them on the trip to Oklahoma. Anyway, I approached them. I wanted them to do the blessing ceremony, but it's so funny. Oh, God, this Kali Yuga, they don't call it that for nothing. I tell you, I wrote this guy this wonderful letter explaining my family history and everything. And, there's even a letter from one of their first female chiefs to this cousin's son, who he was the youngest interpreter hired by the government because he grew up with the Kaw and spoke their language. Anyway, so I wrote all this to a letter and said, would you please come to... Well, and so I finally get him on the phone, and the first thing he says is, well, what's the park about? And I say, well, I tell it from the beginning, so I said, well, originally it was as a memorial to the Free State people and the Connecticut-Kansas colony. Well, if anybody knows what's going on in Kansas right now, in about, I don't know what it was, 1913 or something, these old pioneers, Free Staters in Lawrence, there was this, I won't try to pronounce its name, a glacial erratic, which is Sioux quartzite, at the mouth of the Shunganunga Creek near Tecumseh, right near the railroad tracks. And it's this beautiful 12-foot tall granite rock. Well, all those guys knew each other. The Topeka people wanted it. The Lawrence people wanted it. So the Lawrence people snuck there in the dead of the night with the train and got a crane, took it back to Lawrence, erected it in this, what's called Robinson Park, right on the south side of the river bridge there. It's there to this day. And put a brass plaque on it as a memorial to all those Free State people. Well, it turns out this was sacred to the Kaw, this stone. And it was a sacrilege to them that had happened. And they had despaired of it or, spoken of what an injustice it was. Well, finally, the city of Lawrence, the commission voted to give it back to them.
Okay.
And then a foundation gave them a lot of money to not only physically take it back to Alagawahu Park in Morris County, which the Kaw Indians own. It's a wonderful park, 200 and some acres, 300 maybe, and they have their annual dance powwows there. They have a wonderful pavilion down there. Anyway, so that's where the stone is going, and a lot of the money will go towards education. Why are we doing this? Why was this necessary? And so when I said to this fellow, we are Free Staters, you're the bad guy.
Yeah.
Why do we want to commemorate these Free State? They stole our sacred stone. And it's just like, what is your vision here? What is the overall picture? So anyway, that person, I think we're going to become friends. I hope so. We have a date to go. I want to show him where I think all of the villages in the county were. I think I'm the only one that probably knows that. Anyway, so then I turned to my friend John and said, John, would you come do this? And you saw he did. Yeah. I never give a short answer, Brian.
No, that's fantastic. And the blessing ceremony was really special, and it was very special to attend. And I think it also just builds on the power that is Mount Mitchell. I mean, when you're there, you do feel something visceral there. It's really a great place. So we're caught up to present with Mount Mitchell. You unfortunately can't be part of the nonprofit forever and leading the way. So what is your vision for, say, Mount Mitchell in 10 years and Mount Mitchell in 20 years?
Well, I hope we have an active board. I mean, everybody on our board now contributes, but it's not enough for this next phase where, at least I don't think it is. And we need more people on the board who aren't intimidated by fundraising. or have a hire a person, or anyway get that done in whatever way. I mentioned Blackjack Battlefield. They got a grant to hire an executive director, and I think I'd like to see that somehow us hire an executive director that I could train and teach, and then find the money to pay for it in perpetuity. And that person would have the skills, I would hope, to grow the board, because there are people get passionate about Mount Mitchell because it is a strong. Not everybody gets it, but those who do, it's like, whoa! Here is a Prairie. There's these folks from Minnesota, Syl and Ed Pembleton. They now live in Manhattan. They did a tour of Kansas prairies just to check them all out. And they said that the community at Mount Mitchell, the plant community, was the most diverse they had seen.
Wow.
And this farmland that we bought, we didn't even get to talk about that. We bought 125 acres. 25 was more native prairie, untouched since the last glacier left. Then we have 99 acres of former farmland, and it had all been terraced, which was a thing for many years and still is, I guess, to control erosion in farmland, which keeps getting plowed, and the rain comes and it washes the soil away. Well, now we've put it back to grass, and so we didn't need the terraces anymore. And just weeks ago, the blessing ceremony was before we started work on that. Now we're going to be reseeding it in about 10 days. And we'll have a new trail system through there. And again, in 10 years, I think the Kelseys and the Chryslers who live on the Mitchell farmstead, that'll be around the time, if not before, when they're ready to go on to a new phase in their lives, And so it'll be necessary to, have the management in place to take that on, not only the fundraising to pay for it, but also to manage it. So 10 years, I'm hoping that happens. 20 years out, we're eligible to be a national monument. I mean, this, as I started out, this story is a national story. And you see, that's just on the Bleeding Kansas, Connecticut, Kansas colony, Beecher Bible and Rifle colony, that story. But as soon as we acquired the property, we realized it's the native story, it's African American story, because not just the Underground Railroad passed through the park, but settlement in the region, because all these abolitionists settled in the region. After the Civil War, they welcomed formerly enslaved people. And there are all those stories, and we're losing them. There's, the only people that really remember those families are now in their 80s. And I know of two right now. I missed the boat with one. She's just kind of losing her memory. She's so much fun still to be with. But we want to capture those stories, that African-American history. It's so rich. It was not only exodusters after the failure of Reconstruction, but the first black man in the county was 1866, I think. And the story of Michael, Allie, and his wife, Rosa, Gardenhire. Her name was Rosa Gardenhire. His name was Michael Alley. That's a whole story. Why is that tied to slavery? Anyway, they founded a family here in Wabunsee County, and there are hundreds of descendants all throughout Kansas. A big family group in Wichita, and so we want to tell all those stories. We want to tell the geology story, and not least the tallgrass prairie. This project of reseeding that 100 acres, that's there for the public to see what we're doing and how we're doing it, and what seeds we're using and what methods we're using and how we keep the weeds down. So 20 years, I would like to see us as a national monument. And, it's tourism, it's recreation, education. We cover so many bases. And again, always going back to it's such a heart site. It just makes you glad to be a human being when you're there.
Yeah. Michael, well, that sounds great. I think that Mount Mitchell becoming a national monument would give it the support it deserves.
Yep.
And, being able to get that funding that it deserves. And as you just mentioned there, it's such a great place for so many reasons. And that's what gives it a big boost in relevancy. It's got the recreation, it's got the history, it's got a ton of history, it's got the education components. Local schools come out and do educational stuff too. It's got the conservation aspect to it. That'd be wonderful for it to become a national monument. And so, last question of the episode, do you know what that process is like to become a national monument? I mean, you didn't put that in the 10-year scope, you put that in the 20-year scope. So I think you've looked into that a little bit.
Well, getting on the National Register was the first step. Okay. And we had meetings, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago maybe now, in Wamego with the business community, explaining the process. And Jim Ogle, who also just passed away, he was this very charismatic leader of the Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area. And he came and spoke to the mayor and the city council people, and they have it in their minds. But, it needs to keep getting passed down because, I mean, at my age, I've cultivated all these relationships, then they retire, or they leave the scene. And so you got to keep at it. And so we're doing that. And then the other big project in the next 10, I should have said, that 3-phase project of widening 99, the last phase is from Wamego to Highway 18, which is the northwest corner of the park, is to include a bike walking trail along there. And that who knows, the way things cost, that could be $1 million. So again, working with the governor, hopefully in KDOT, we'll get that going. I mean, everybody has agreed to it in theory. Now it's just actually, where's the money going to come from? So, and again, that'll put it more on the map.
Absolutely. And so, how far is Mount Mitchell from Wamego? Is it
3 miles?
3 miles. Okay.
Yep.
I got to imagine, my guess is, and just looking into the crystal ball of the future, that if Mount Mitchell did become a national monument, it would also boost the tourism to Wamego. And Mount Mitchell already does boost the tourism to Wamego. And that's something that's really helpful for the town of Wamego. And so I wonder if the governing body of Wamego kind of has that on their long-term future about helping Mount Mitchell become a national monument, because that's going to benefit Wamego.
Well, I think you should ask the leaders of Wamego that. I mean, the banker Lance White has been. I love Lance.
Yeah,
I'm all optimistic and go and when I go and talk to Lance, he brings me back to earth and says, well, what about this? But I was right. I mean, he said nobody's ever going to develop that farmland around Mount Mitchell, and here it all is, just I think 2 years after he told me that. So no, and in a way, there's that Missouri trait of show me. That's the motto of Missourians. There's and I don't blame them. There's been skeptical, but hello, I have been at it for 20 years now, and we have brought it to this point. So it is time for them to step up. Because what you said is exactly true. We have all that traffic coming to the Oz Museum. Well, we can build on that with heritage travel. And young people love to hike. I mean, I follow the tourism through the Kansas Department of Tourism, the trends and things. And hiking is right up there with all the Gen Z people. So, again, our time will come. It's just taking a while.
Yeah, well, Mount Mitchell, as you know, for me, it's a great place for me to get out into nature. It's only about 4 miles from where I live, and I'm excited to get back out there tomorrow morning. I haven't gone out to Mount Mitchell in a couple of days because it rained a couple of days ago. And so I don't go out there when it rains or the day afterwards, just because the road gets all messed up and the trails get messed up. But today in Kansas, so yesterday it rained the day before, 2 days ago. Yesterday was just cold and nasty. There's no way that was going to dry out. Today's been bright and sunny, about 45 degrees or so. So I'll be going out there tomorrow morning and getting some of my nature time in and watching the sunrise from Mount Mitchell, and enjoying those views of the river, and just enjoying my part within that big old historical picture that exists at Mount Mitchell. So, Michael, Mount Mitchell means a lot to me, and I personally want to say thank you for everything you've done over the last 20 years and more to march Mount Mitchell to where it's at right now. And I know that there's so much that we didn't even cover today that you have done. There's so many details. There's so much paperwork to go into all those accolades that I listed off. You've done a lot of computer work for something that's for outdoors.
Well, and my favorite part always, I have photographs, us old people out there with loppers, cutting the invasive trees and things. And I loved, we only have 3 benches in the park now, and just to sit on one of those benches and just listen to the birds and the wind and everything. Oh, there's nothing better.
Yeah, no, and it really is a local treasure too, in terms of we don't have a lot of parks and protected areas around here. The state of Kansas is 98% private land, if not even a little bit more than that. And so these little places that are very sacred, they're protected, they're conserved, mean a lot to the people, to the local communities, and especially people like me, Gen Zers, that like to get out hiking and enjoy nature and whatnot. So it's really wonderful to have nearby, and I function so much better when I can get out of nature multiple times a week. So thanks for doing everything you do.
I love to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Michael, it's really been a lot of great information you shared today. I was just blown away by all the details that you have and all this great stuff. And I think that also resonates with, Mount Mitchell also needs to also capture some of the historical stories from people that are, getting to their later stages of life, that have these personal connections to the area, or their family did and whatnot. So it's definitely your expertise as a historian showed. And I think that also connects towards, making sure that we share those stories of other people too, that have a long family history in this area and with Mount Mitchell.
Thanks, Brad.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to throw on the outro music and we'll call it a session.